Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Charlotte Perkins was an independent thinker. She was best known in her time as a crusading journalist and feminist intellectual, author, philosopher, artist, novelist, suffragist, wife, invalid, and lecturer, who was a leader of the women's movement from the later 1890s through the mid-1920s. She was a follower of such pioneering women's rights advocates as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was concerned with political inequality and social justice, but the primary focus of her writing was the unequal status of women within the institution of marriage. Charlotte Ann Perkins was born on July 3, 1860, which was the eve of the American Civil War in Hartford, Connecticut. Her parents were Mary Fitch Westcott, and her father was Frederick Beecher Perkins. She was the great niece of Henry Ward Beecher, who was a clergyman and social reformer, and his sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who is the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. When Charlotte was a young girl, her father abandoned the family. Having very few resources, the family was on the edge of poverty. They had no choice but to move around a lot, often living in temporary residences or living with a variety of relatives for a number of years. As a young child, this had to give her feelings of deep insecurities and abandonment. Charlotte wrote and lectured at length on reforming marriage and the family, the awareness and notoriety that her own marriages and family life unavoidably distressed her greatly. She made headlines not only with her thoughts and ideas, but with her life. In 1884, she married Charles Walter Stetson. They had a daughter together and named her Catherine Beecher Stetson. After the birth of her daughter, she suffered from depression, yet some have said that she suffered from terrible bouts of depression immediately after marrying Charles. But most likely, she had postpartum depression and ended up having a nervous breakdown, which subsequently affected her for years to come. Charlotte ended up going to a sanatorium in Philadelphia in 1887, where she was treated by Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell, who is the doctor in her short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, and who also is the name of one of the main characters in the NBC television hit series, Grimm. Dr. Mitchell's idea of a cure for her included no physical or intellectual stimulation, which included her writing. He wanted her to live as domestic a life as possible. I would bet that this rest cure of his was an idea of her husband's. The Yellow Wallpaper was a fictionalized account of a woman's descent into madness. This was based on her own experience of a deteriorating marriage and her resulting mental breakdown. Her short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, looks back to the tradition of the psychological horror take as practiced by Edgar Allan Poe. In the tale of Poe's The Telltale Heart, it is told from the point of view of an insane narrator. Going further back, Gilman also draws on the tradition of the Gothic romances of the late 18th century, which often featured spooky old mansions and young heroines determined to uncover their secrets. Gilman's story is also forward-looking, however, and her moment-by-moment reporting of the narrator's thoughts is clearly a move in the direction of the sort of stream of consciousness narration used by such 20th century writers as Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and William Faulkner. Charlotte was so miserable with the doctor's orders that she moved herself to California around 1888 and at the same time divorced her husband at a time when divorce was still considered scandalous, and sending their 9-year-old daughter to live with him and his second wife, Grace Ellery Channing, who happened to be a close friend of Charlotte's. The couple raised Catherine in California. This drew extensive public attention and criticism. In these years, she was particularly influenced by the sociologist Lester Ward and the utopian novelist Edward Bellamy. She became involved with social reform and feminist issues, giving lectures all over North America and the United Kingdom. Her major subjects were on trade unions and women's suffrage. Additionally, she had her articles published in the New England Magazine. During this period of history, an emphasis was placed on separate spheres for males and females. It was acceptable for men to enter the labor force and earn money to support the family, the true breadwinner of the time. But females were confined to a domestic area of maintaining the household and raising children. Women did not have a vote. Women did not have much of a say. The woman question became the popular blanket term to describe the ongoing debate on the role and nature of women in these changing times. In 1896, Charlotte was living in Chicago, where she continued her writing and connected with several other groundbreaking women of social reform, including Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr, who were the founders of the settlement house, Hull House. Gilman wrote Women and Economics, a study of the economic relation between men and women as a factor in social relations. 1898 became a bestseller, which was translated into several different languages. This book earned her immediate celebrity, and that is still considered her most important nonfiction work. This powerful feminist manifesto argues a thesis Gilman was to develop and refine for the rest of her life. A woman's economic dependency on men stunts not only the growth of women, but that of the whole human species. More particularly, she argued that because of the dependency of women on men for food and shelter, the sexual and maternal aspects of their personalities had been developed excessively and to the detriment of other productive capabilities. On June 11, 1900, Charlotte married her first cousin, George Houghton Gilman, who died very suddenly in 1934. At that point, Charlotte was plagued by depression, that dark place that she had gone in and out of throughout her entire life. Charlotte's death in 1935 equaled her life in drama. 3 years after she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she committed suicide, announcing that she preferred chloroform to cancer. As I look back at all the research I had done on Charlotte, I understand the political concept of women's rights through her writings and lectures we as women have achieved. Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which was published in 1899 at the height of Gilman's lecture tours and the year after the publication of Women in Economics. A lot of the anxieties and stresses of women being confined to traditional roles of wife and mother can be seen in both women's works. Specifically, similarities in themes included the repressed wife character in Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper and Chopin's The Story of an Hour. On a basic level, Mrs. Mallard and the narrator of The Yellow Wallpaper find freedom through extreme circumstances, the former through insanity and the latter in death. However, Chopin and Gilman differ greatly on what they believe to be the most important thing for women to gain. For Kate Chopin, the self is the highest good. A woman must identify for her needs and identity independent of her husbands and children. Gilman agrees that a woman's independence from her husband is crucial, but the greatest good is motherhood, and the self falls behind the responsibility. Death? Why this fuss about death? Use your imagination. Try to visualize a world without death. Death is the essential condition of life, not an evil. Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is the woman's century, the first chance for the mother of the world to raise to her full place. And the world waits while she powders her nose. Only as we live, think, feel, and work outside the home, we become humanly developed, civilized, socialized. Question 1. Charlotte argued that women's contributions to civilization throughout history have been halted because of an androcentric culture. What do you think she meant by that? Question 2. If Charlotte were alive today, what do you think her philosophy on women's rights would be?